Good morning. Welcome to the Huxley Morton podcast, insights into the world of clinical trials. Today, we will be speaking with Adam Walker, a biometrics consultant, data and quality and medtech expert, sharing his insights as to how we got into the industry, a day in the life of his world and his thoughts on the industry going forward. So Adam, you and I have spoken, I guess, off air previously. But if you could perhaps just give our listeners a quick introduction as to your role, your company, and what you do as a biometrics expert.
Certainly. And firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to do this, James. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. So my background, I came into clinical research and data more broadly 20 odd years ago. I studied pharmaceutical sciences, and I always had a passion for medicine. I didn't get the grades at university at school to study medicine, so I did what I thought was the next best thing, to spend as much time as I could around medics, and that led me down the avenue of clinical research. And so for the last 20 odd years, that's what I've been doing. I've been working alongside medics, building data outputs, and working alongside those individuals in supporting the outcomes of clinical trials. Data has changed. Data has not changed, but the manner in which it's collected has changed an awful lot in that period of time. When I first started, it was pen and paper, and technology advancement then meant fax collections. So, fax machines 20 odd years ago was really cutting edge. Nowadays, obviously, it's all in the palm of a hand in a mobile phone and in an app. So I've had to adapt, learn, and acquire new skills along the way, and that's indeed what I've done in many of the different companies I've worked with.
Well, I think you're spot on in terms of data collection and how things have changed. And you mentioned fax machines there. I actually used to sell fax machines and photocopiers many years ago, and the way the industry's changed there has been immense. And what we have in our pockets these days it's just crazy to think that there was these huge machines, and now we're walking around with it, sat there. So look, going back, I guess a quick rewind. You said that you perhaps didn't get the grades that you needed to. Many of us have experienced that, and misspent youth and whatnot. How did that? Was it something that you always wanted to go into, or did the grades push you down a certain route? Talk me through, I guess, sure. What went through your mind when, if you were looking at one avenue and the grades didn't hit and you thought, where do I go from here?
I'll give you an impression. So if you were to ask my parents when I first became passionate about medicine, I think for my 12th birthday, they bought me a skeleton, a full working skeleton that I hung behind my bedroom door. Yeah. And they knew then that was my passion. It was all around science, and I was good at, really, really good at science, and really, really passionate about the human body. And the interest I had in that just continued all the way through. And I guess that was really my focus all the way through then my secondary education to A-levels. And I chose to do chemistry, physics, and biology because I thought that would be the best means of getting to where I wanted to. In reality, it probably wasn't the best thing I could have done. And in hindsight, I think I recognized that whilst I was great at biology, I also had some other skills, and I was very, very good at languages. And I should have probably continued with French because I was, top of the school in French. Wow. And probably geography, because that was my other, my two best grades at GCSE were geography and French, and I was miles ahead in those. And then, the science, whilst I was good at it, I wasn't as good at it as those things. So I probably didn't read the signs early enough, and maybe I blindly went into A-levels thinking I would just stumble through it and it would all be okay. It turned out that, the jump from GCSE to A-level is enormous, and the specialization in biology, chemistry, and physics is also highly challenging. And the gaps in physics really became evident because most of the guys that I was on the course with were doing A-level maths, and there was a huge maths component, which I never got because I wasn't doing A-level maths. So there was a huge gap, and I don't think that was really explained to me at the time. So in a roundabout way, then, when I then went down the route of doing those A-levels, about at the end of my first year of A levels, it became quite evident that I wasn't going to hit the top grades. And then it was kind of a situation of getting the best opportunities I could at university,
Right.
taking down the route of going down, a medical science, a biomedical science. And that was where I came across the course of pharmaceutical sciences at the University of Greenwich, which was a tremendous course. So
Definitely.
it's a 4-year course. It still runs now. It was the first university to offer a sandwich placement year. So it was a 4-year course with a year in industry. And not only did I learn everything about physiology, drug delivery systems, and pharmaceutical analysis and pharmacokinetics, namely the absorption, uptake, and distribution of drugs in the body, but the other aspect was that I spent a year in industry working for the first time in a scientific discipline that wasn't McDonald's or KFC or delivering newspapers, which is what I'd only ever done in my part-times before.
Yeah.
So it was the first time I worked in a scientific environment, thought, crikey, this is the real world. And I should also preface that by saying it was a naval institution. So the Royal Naval College in Greenwich, at that time, trained naval submariners to go down in submarines and do all the nuclear physics around that. So I learned a heck of a lot. I did an incredibly interesting project for that year. Got to spend a lot of time with naval submariners, do a lot of sport, and be exposed to some tremendous opportunities in that year. Nice. And actually, at the end of it, I had the focus that I didn't have throughout my degree, first and second year, so that I knew at the end of that third year, that going into my final year, what I really needed to do to get a career in science. Yeah, that was what I did. I really knuckled down and focused on that final year, and got the best I could.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think that's a great option that you've taken there. Funny enough, I also, when I went to university, I opted for a 4-year sandwich course, but I couldn't find a placement that I seemed to be a good fit at the time, and ended up going from a business studies and economics degree to a business administration degree. And I missed out on that year in industry. But I think looking back at it for me now, and I've got several friends that just went straight into industry, I think that it's a massive thing, isn't it? Just having that exposure almost midway through your studies, because it prepares you and it makes you realize why you're studying.
That was exactly what it did for me. So bear in mind, at the beginning of that third year, when I went to the Royal Naval College, I had hair down to here, long hair, very, very long hair. And the last thing I did on the last week when I finished at the, by the way, I used to get ribbed, as you can imagine, being surrounded by guys like hair like this now.
Yeah.
So as a point, the last week I went to the hairdressers and got it all cut off and went with a short back and sides and turned up for my final week there, and really approached that final year with a zeal and a vigor to succeed as best as I possibly could. I absolutely did that. And, it was transformative, that experience. Not just cut the hair.
That's just one side of the transformation. I mean, you touched on it then. For me, I was actually, during my studies, I was working at McDonald's. That was the part-time job. I didn't know that about you beforehand, but I actually thought that was a great job, right? It teaches you a lot of staff rotation and the some of the business models behind what goes on in McDonald's, which is often looked down on. Is I still employ my business today, so it's crazy. But that's some transformation, particularly with it. I love the fact that there's the haircut in there, just to almost mark that transformation into the final year.
I've had some life affirming experiences in my life, and we might talk about them later. But certainly that was a transformative experience. And then after I graduated, my wife and I, she wasn't my wife at the time, by the way, she was my girlfriend. But we went to Israel, and we went and lived and worked on a kibbutz, on 2 different kibbutz in Israel. And that was the other transformative experience that we both experienced together, was really to understand what it meant to live with nothing and appreciate everything. And we were the poorest and the happiest we've ever been. She would say exactly the same. I'm pointing to the door because she's the other side of that door. Yeah. But we would both absolutely say that when we had nothing, we were the happiest. And actually, that's the reality of it, is that appreciating everything and building a value in doing and being part of a community was enormously impactful to both of us.
100%, 100%. So look, I think it's fair to say that, yeah, this is kind of the route that you always wanted to go down. It's a little bit skewed at points because there was a couple of bumps in the road, but hey, that's kind of life, isn't it? That happens for everyone. It doesn't always go the way that you want it to.
My life has not followed a simple path. It's something that I actually appreciate, the bumps in the road and those kind of actual signposts, the opportunities for signposts, because by nature I'm a risk taker. I like change and I adapt to change very well. Some people don't, and I recognize that as being a superpower. And so that's one of my superpowers. When there's change and when there's opportunity up front, I will take it as opposed to keeping the status quo. That's what I actually do, and I actively do that.
Likewise, I'm kind of the same. I heard a quote from someone who talks about change and the fact that if it's not broke, don't fix it. But he then goes on to say, well, if it could be better, it's as good as broken. You have to, in this world, kind of sometimes just ditch your old ideas, even if they've been family traditions, whatever it may be. If there's a new idea that comes along and it's better, it's that's the mark of a successful person, is being able to take that new idea and run with it. So clearly it's worked for me in my life. Clearly it's worked for yourself also. You're now working as a biometrics expert. We spoke off air that you have been a consultant, you've managed teams, you've grown teams, you've hired, and obviously as a recruitment business, I know how difficult that can be. But look, talk us through your kind of day-to-day, or typical, should I say, day-to-day pre-COVID, and how that may have changed to where we are today.
So I went back into consulting just over a year ago, having completed a permanent role, and prior to that, I'd done 4 or 5 years of consulting. What was interesting, I worked as a consultant for 4 or 5 years before I went back into permanent work. And I've been consulting again for the last just over a year. And the reason I enjoy consulting personally is because it's down to me. I'm my own business developer. I rely upon my professional connections and my own professionalism and references to ensure that I get future work. The difference is so marked between that and permanent roles. And my expectations of myself and my team don't change whether I'm permanent or consulting. But the difference I find is that there is no comfort in consulting. Every day is different. There is no arm around the shoulder, it's going to be okay. It's down to you. If you get out of bed in the morning, you don't feel like being fresh and being the best version of yourself, then you're going to have a pretty lousy day. And people are going to pick up on that very quickly in all the conversations that you have, whether it be by email, in person, or on the phone. And I actually, what I found during COVID is I was doing a 6-month placement with the MHRA up at Canary Wharf, and I was commuting every day on the train up there. Just at the beginning of lockdown, I had about a month to go. And I was one of the last people left on the train, and they were a government agency. And I was thinking, well, surely they're going to be closing down. Every other building around us was closed.
Yeah,
we were literally the only ones left. All of my friends who work in private industry had been working from home for 3 or 4 weeks. And I continued and finished that project and didn't actually expect there to be much more on the back of that. In other words, I thought I would actually be very quiet. And what I found was that through LinkedIn and through various professional avenues, I got contacted about a number of different opportunities and was in a position where I found I had more than one client for the first time in my consulting career.
Perfect.
And so it's gone. And those have been, some of them have been extended, but some of them have been ad hoc. And those ad hoc ones are highly lucrative. You don't know when they're going to come, but when they do, they're always really fun. I have a conversation with a venture capital panel or someone like that, and they'll ask me about what's happening in the industry with regards to, I don't know, a technology or a particular approach to, it might be testing of COVID. I don't know. I've had so many broad conversations during this lockdown period. And And those are, very well remunerated. They're usually an hour or two conversation, and at the end of it, I feel like I've given something back. And certainly, the people that I'm speaking to feel they've learned something about the industry, because they're looking in from the outside and they're looking at investing in a company or a technology or a proposition around those things. So those sorts of conversations seem to be happening a lot now. I would say to the point where I'm having 2 or 3 a month, probably, of those. And alongside that, I'm doing a number of different ad hoc activities for companies. So there seems to be a lot more ad hoc, and my time is taken up juggling many different. You
almost kind of, it sounds as though you're working in bursts almost. You do a stint over here, you're then doing a stint sort of elsewhere, but because they're lucrative enough, it kind of it's still pays the mortgage, pays the bills, and allows you to kind of run your day rather than having an office and your day running you effectively.
Exactly. To that point, I mean, I speak to a number of friends who are in permanent employment, and they say, well, what you up to today, or what you up to this week, when I see them on the side of the rugby pitch on a Sunday where my son's playing. And it may sound like I'm being vague, but actually I don't know what each week is going to end up like.
It's exciting, right? It's, I kind of like that.
No 2 days are the same, and actually there are very few days where I will make a decision to not actively do anything that will further my opportunities. I give the example of yesterday. So my kids are on half term this week. They're both working hard towards the GCSE and A levels this summer. They needed a break. We all needed a break. My wife's a teacher, so we decided with our friends that they would go rock climbing. So we took them rock climbing. I switched off all my technology and I didn't do anything as far as developing business, responding to emails or anything. We were in the middle of the forest. There was no technology anyway. There was no signal, and that was perfect. And when I came back home last night, I checked my emails. There were a couple of bits and pieces. I said, I'll pick these up in the morning. And that's exactly what I've done. So, you have the autonomy to define what your boundaries are.
Yeah.
And many people in permanent positions find it difficult to have boundaries because they're
governed by.
They're nervous, they're worried, they think they're being scrutinized all the time, and actually they usually are, and their time is accountable. Every minute of every day is accountable to them, to their superiors.
Yeah.
They have to complete timesheets. They have to be visible. They have to be available. Now, I'm all of those things, but it's on my terms and not someone else's terms, and that's the difference as a consultant that I experience, and that I really enjoy more than anything else.
And I think it's a great model. I mean, you clearly enjoy it. I mean, as a business owner, I'm kind of at the opposite end. I take people on, but that's to an extent what my business model is all about. It's about empowering our staff to do exactly what you're doing, but just under the umbrella, as it may be, of Huxley Morton. And yes, we're small, we're growing, but I think with the outbreak of COVID, it's almost launched us and this business model much faster than what would have otherwise happened. We've got a couple of guys doing it. It's working well. They seem to absolutely love it. Yes, we check in on Zoom, on Teams, etc. But I'm not one to be checking up on people. I don't want to be saying how many calls have you made, how many emails have you done, have you done this, have you done that. The people, if you hire right and you get the right individual, someone like yourself who clearly is passionate about what they do, you don't need to be doing that checking up because you know that person's doing it for themselves anyway. And as a consultant, it's clear that you're taking that as one of the best parts. But what would you say is the hardest part of that? Is it kind of a double-edged sword between the best part and the hardest part is maybe that uncertainty? I know that's perhaps what it was like for me when starting the business. It was what the positivity was also the challenge.
I'm happy to answer that question because the last 12 months I've been absolutely flat out, and for the last couple of weeks I've had a little bit of downtime where I would say, like an actor, I'm slightly between roles, so I'm doing a bit more business development activity, waiting for one of those projects to drop. Now, if several of them drop at the same time, I'm going to be in a position where I'm probably going to have to hire someone. And I've got some people in line who are ready to go if they need to be. Yeah. So there is a kind of flexibility and agility around it where we can go from boom to bust and vice versa as quickly.
Yeah.
So you've got to be agile, you've got to be flexible, you've got to be ready. But as I say, these opportunities are changing all the time, and life sciences right now is so hot, it's ridiculous.
Massively.
It's not a cliche to say this is absolutely, the forefront of all decision making right now, to the point where, I've been talking to a company who are doing mobile COVID testing. So they go to these professional football and rugby and film sets for like Netflix and Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
They park their vehicles outside, they do COVID testing, but they're doing nothing with the data. Now, a contact of mine sent me a message on LinkedIn the other day and said, I've just started working for these guys. I really think they need to speak to you because they're doing nothing with their data, either externally or internally. They're not analyzing it. They're not looking for patterns of behavior. They're certainly not sharing it in a wider sense, but they're doing 20,000, maybe 50,000 COVID tests a week. And that's outside of the government stuff.
Wow. That is, I mean, I'm no data expert, but that amount of data floating around and just
doing nothing with.
Yeah, just being data. It's kind of
but now overlay that with COVID. Okay, so these are patterns that we are all seeing and hearing about in the public domain that are being managed by the government. This information is underneath the radar. That's not publicly available information at the moment. I'm not saying it needs to be public, but certainly there is value in that data. That's my point.
Oh, definitely.
So that's the kind of conversations that seem to drop into my lap all the time at the moment.
Yeah.
I could give you countless other examples of similar sorts of things, but it's dynamic and it's changing all the time. And it's changing because the virus is impacting the way that people are working, where they're commuting, how they're able to work. These films and Netflix, look, everyone's at home. We're all watching Netflix. No one's going to the cinema. We're all watching box sets. They've got to keep that going all the time. And they've got new content running all the time, all over the country.
Well, I know that, I mean, filming hasn't necessarily stopped. I don't know if I mentioned, but my younger sister is a stuntman or stunt performer.
I didn't know that.
And she is currently, or she has been for the last couple of weeks, over in Northern Ireland doing filming. So I'd imagine that these guys have these COVID testing sets. She's over there with...
That's what they do.
Who's is the world's strongest man? Thor, or not Eddie Hall, the other huge guy. So he's part of the team over there. I don't know what they're filming, but it all looks very dangerous.
It sounds like Game of Thrones. I think that guy's in Game of Thrones, isn't he? And I know they film it in Ireland, but it could well be. Again, she's one of these people never starstruck by any means. Like, we'll all ask her as a family, who was on set, who was this? She's just like, oh, I don't know. Oh, that guy out of that program. You're like, come on. Well, you see, without this kind of capability, you can't be running films right now. You certainly, professional Premier League football and rugby would not be happening right now any more than golf or tennis or any of these things. They're testing them almost every day.
Yeah.
And they're doing it on site and they're doing rapid turnaround testing, and they're being paid for by the RFU, by the FA, and by the LTA. All of those associations are ensuring that they're COVID free so that they can continue to take part in sport, but also that they can televise it so that the rest of us can at least, pay for this view. Yeah,
well, I'm guessing you're trying to do all your bit as much as you can so that you can get back to your beloved Brighton football matches as a season ticket there, right?
Yeah. Well, of course. And funnily enough, I've had a couple of conversations with our local BBC channel about that, funnily enough, because there have been a lot of connections around not just myself, but my parents who are shielding, and they're also season ticket holders at the Albion.
Yeah.
I've been representing them because effectively they were asked to continue paying for their season ticket when they knew that they weren't ever going to be going back into that ground until COVID's gone. And I put that question to Brighton and Hove Albion and to the chief executive, Paul Barber, around why they should be insisting that people who were shielding were still paying their season ticket, even though they could not go to the ground.
Yeah.
That's a whole different conversation, but actually there are many layers to what we're all experiencing right now.
Sure. Okay. Well, look, I guess back to, that's kind of how things have been going. There's a lot it sounds like there's been a lot going on, and there's been a lot of changes that you've sort of faced personally over the past 6 to 9 months. I guess, what would you say has been maybe the most challenging of those? And what has that taught you about yourself, and what have you learned about yourself? It sounds like there was some lessons in life early on when, you know, your wife and yourself traveled, and that's perhaps where you've picked up a lot of your communication skills. That's one thing that, you know, I really like about you. And it's interesting to hear that you were so good at languages and even communicating in French way back when.
And Hebrew. I speak Hebrew. I read and write
Wow.
Hebrew.
So yeah, what have you learned over, you know, that's what you've learned over the years, and clearly it's molded you into the person that you are now. But what, for everyone, there's probably been a huge acceleration about what they've been learning about themselves over the past 6 months. I know for me, it's been massive in terms of my views on how I want to structure and run the business. Rather than having a load of guys in an office, I'm now trying to empower people to almost kind of work like for themselves.
Autonomously, yes.
Yeah. I mean, what have you learned about sort of yourself at your end, Adam?
I've always been very keen on structure, and I've got, as I said, I've got 2 teenage kids at the moment who are preparing, hopefully, for exams next summer.
Yeah.
What's very clear to me is that as a parent and as a professional, I need structure, and every day needs to be structured. You know, getting up at a regular time, getting regular sleep, and just being available. And that may be whether it's online, on phone, or whatever. You know, the challenges right now are no different to what they've ever been, except we have rules and regulations around how we can govern ourselves. So, you know, the kind of advice I've given to my children has been really around making sure that every single day, at every opportunity that they've gone back into school, their teacher sees that they are trying as hard as they can, that they are showing and demonstrating improvements in their learning every single day, because at any given point, we're all being assessed, okay? And this is a life lesson. We are all being assessed, whether we like it or not, every single day of the year.
Definitely.
Now, if they don't sit their exams, whatever they've demonstrated since they've returned to school is going to be the level that they're going to get. So we had this conversation as a family at the beginning of lockdown, and we said, just continue to do exactly what you're doing. Work hard, get your work in on time, don't miss assessments. And when you do go back to school, because this was in March, we had this conversation, when you do go back to school, you're absolutely going to have to be top of the class, visible, accessible, answering questions. And I've taken that principle back into my own work, which is, you know, just be as visible and as transparent and as clear in your communications, whether it be professionally or personally, all the way through. And that's really not changed in me, but it's much more visible now, because my shop front is LinkedIn. It's also every email that I send or receive, and it's the responsiveness that I have to emails, to requests for proposals, to supporting my professional network. You know, if someone happens to send me a message on LinkedIn and says, I've been talking to this client, it would be really great if I could pick up the phone and speak to them, then I will that particular day. You know, I'm not going to put it off a couple of days. I'm absolutely.
I think you're spot on with that, actually. Yeah, in terms of just being visible. It's perhaps, I think a lot of us are doing exactly the same, but it has to be shown a bit more. You know, I have conversations with candidates looking for work a lot of the time, and they may know that they've got 15 years of experience in oncology or, you know, another therapeutic area, for example. But if it's not demonstrated on their LinkedIn profile or on their resume or CV, how is a third party able to see that? And that's sort of the guidance I'm often giving behind the scenes is you need to kind of showcase these things and brag a little bit more, without going over the top, of course. And I think, you mentioned LinkedIn. I mean, that's a huge platform at the moment. And it is just a case of highlighting your expertise and also just giving back to others. Like you said, you know, if people reach out, it doesn't take forever to, you know, guide them in the right direction. We would all appreciate it. So, I've been doing it. It's great to hear that you've been doing it. I think that as a community, everyone is kind of coming together in that sort of way.
I will take up on that point. Exactly. So, you know, the reason that you and I are having this conversation today is because I never shut down any conversation. You and I had not spoken a couple of weeks ago before. You contacted me on LinkedIn. I was open to having a conversation. I will never, ever turn down the opportunity to speak to someone, because you never know where it's going to lead. And you never know what that opportunity might open up into. You don't know what they might look to. But also to another point you made about being visible. There is a very fine line between being visible and oversharing. And I read this term earlier in the week. I was reading a paper, and they were talking about this toxic positivity. Now, that's a very fine line between oversharing, being too much of yourself, and actually finding a balance between sharing and imparting knowledge, and at the same time showcasing yourself to the point where people stop following you or don't want to see what you're sharing. So it's very, very fine. It's a very fine line. So there's certain articles I will share and may not give a comment on. I'll just put them out there and say, if you follow me, you might find this interesting, and I'll just leave it as that. Or I read this and I thought this was great, but not over egging every opportunity to be visible. You know what I mean?
Because sometimes I have to be conscious of that one myself. I guess as a former sort of sportsman, I would always be talking about my successes. It was part of just building my own confidence. So I'm always running the highlight reel. So you're spot on. I'm always conscious of, am I now coming across in a way that will frustrate people to an extent? So
you don't want to alienate your audience. It's a very, very fine line between alienating and keeping engaged with your audience. And I think more so than ever, I really appreciate that and see it and experience it, because I think where other people are perhaps going too far, and I don't want to be that person. So that is also a very fine balance, particularly when you're running your own business, when I'm relying upon that visibility to build more opportunities.
As you say, you're your own shop front, and what you put out is your shop front, as it may be. And I think, on the subject of platforms and LinkedIn, Instagram, and oversharing, undersharing, not being authentic, etc., etc. We've all seen it all on LinkedIn over the past sort of few months. I know that you're a big advocate of sort of e-health and things going digital. Kind of brings me nicely on to the next question that I had in mind was, what are your thoughts on virtual trials and the way the pharma industry is going? I've sat in a whole host of webinars. I often have them playing in the background whilst I'm, going through admin related works at my desk, and, talking about pharma companies coming together and maybe making less individually, but sort of sharing their and just that whole, similar to LinkedIn, networking together and sharing data, etc. What are your thoughts on how that's going to go, in order to ensure that clinical trials continue to run and that we're analysing and getting that data, sharing that data? What are your thoughts on that side of things?
So, trials have always run in a virtual sense. So we've often talked about e-consent and doing things electronically. You don't have to physically go to a hospital to meet the person to sign a piece of paper. We know that now. We've got electronic signatures. We've had them for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise about that particular aspect, when in fact, my feeling is really people are using this as a platform to open up conversations more than adapting particularly approaches that are working, because clinical research is the most highly regulated industry there is, outside of banking. Okay, we're dealing with people's health. We're dealing with putting drugs in human beings. So none of those rules have changed. What I think has changed, though, is that the public perception of getting vaccines to market. Okay, I've never worked on a clinical trial where a drug has got to market in less than 10 years. So when I pick up the newspaper and I hear that people are saying that within 3 or 6 months we're going to have a vaccine that's going to get rid of COVID, I'm like, that's not going to happen. Now, it doesn't matter how good your science is. There are processes in place in the clinical trial process that protect the individual, the health of the individual. It's all about patient safety. The only thing that matters. Okay, so if it's not safe for a patient, once it's gone through animal toxicology, healthy volunteers, phase 2, phase 3, and post-marketing, it's not going to get to market. So, we can wish hard and we can stand up on podiums and say that, by the end of the year, this is going to happen because we're going to be voted in on the back of that. But actually, the reality I tell my friends and family is this is going to be with us for a long time. So let's just deal with it. Okay. Respect what we're dealing with and don't think that there is a magic bullet, because there isn't. And that's hard to hear, but that's what we live with here. That's what my parents have lived with since before lockdown. That's the conversation I had with them. I said, unfortunately, this is going to shut down things for you a lot. It's going to shut down things for all of us, and we're all going to have to make choices on the back of that.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question about virtual trials, people who want to do clinical trials will always do them. The fact is that there's an awful lot more publicity around COVID trials than any other right now. And that doesn't mean that cancer has gone away, and any other indication that we've been working on for the last 15, 20 years. Diabetes is still a big killer. Cancers, you name it, they're all still out there.
Still there,
and there's this tidal wave of issues coming over the corner because we've taken our eye off the ball, to be quite frank. We're going to have to get some measures in place, and we are going to all have to respect new rules, and that's what we're doing, and we're adapting to them in different guises in different locations around the world. But the days of jumping on a plane and going on a holiday and coming back and there being no implications for that, that's gone for a while. So we just got to deal with that, and this is going to impact all of our lives in many different aspects of our lives, but we're just going to have to adapt. And so that, coming back to your original question around virtual trials, you're still going to have to go into a hospital setting and be injected with a drug, or have certain tests done on your body, because you can't do all those things remotely. What you can do is you can give your consent online, but you're going to have that interaction in a clinical setting with medics at some point. To that point, I was approached about joining a flu camp a couple of weeks ago in London, and I've been thinking about going into London and doing that, because I think that would be an interesting way to see how those things are being addressed, bearing in mind I've worked in a number of early phase clinical trial units, and I know how restrictive they are. And I think it would be interesting just to see how those restrictions are played out for COVID.
Behind the scenes, firsthand.
Yeah, because that's not what's in the public domain at the moment. It's not being shared in the public domain, and those are the kind of conversations that I think are real and are going to drive life sciences outside of just COVID.
Well, I mean, my view on it is just the amount of media around it can only be a good thing. And as you say, if people are going to have to just knuckle down and get used to it, it's probably just, as we've sort of learning about ourselves, it's maybe just accelerating that, because the world of clinical trials, it's often just unheard of. People don't, unless you're in the industry, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes, and it's kind of all alien, whereas now it's in the forefront. So hopefully there's, that silver lining that comes out of this is just that raised awareness.
But it's just a reality check. When I said about the 8 to 10 years, your face dropped.
Yeah.
Your face dropped because that's not in the public domain. But I'm telling you, this is the reality of it. And if I were given an opportunity to stand on a podium and address this country, I'd be giving them a reality check right now, because actually that might make people's behaviour change. Whereas they think this is a short-term thing, I'm afraid this is not. Don't think about this in 4-week chunks. Think about this in 4 months, 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but if something happens sooner, fantastic.
Adam, wait until I go and tell my missus about this. She's not going to be. Her face is going to drop also. But such is life. It's one of those things that I'm always a great believer that you have to suck these things up. You have to accept it, and then create a path that is going to work long term. It's like a diet plan, a fitness plan. Small changes, and it comes naturally. Whereas if you try and just go from 0 to 100 with anything, it just doesn't work. So
a marathon starts with one step.
100%. So look, that's kind of brings us to the close there of my line of questioning for you. I guess one thing I always just like to ask at the end of any interview is, we've heard about you, what you do. There was a clear route into the market, right from the skeleton hanging up on your door as a 12-year-old child. But what would have been your route if you weren't in the world of pharmaceuticals, biometrics, data, and doing what you're doing now? What would you have liked to have done outside of that? Is it Brighton centre forward? What are the interests elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, outside of work, I've always been heavily involved in sport, and throughout my school years, I was very sporting. I played a lot of football, a little bit of rugby, not as much as I would have liked to have done because I wasn't as good at it. And I was one of the few kids that continued playing sport when we left school. So I played county league football through my 20s and 30s. And I encourage both my kids are very sporting. My daughter's a horse rider and she was a county swimmer. My son plays rugby at a very high level, county level. So we're always in and around sport, and we're outdoors all the time. We live very close to the South Downs. We've got 3 dogs. We go out walking. We do a lot of outdoors activities. My wife is an environmentalist. She teaches geography and she studied environmental science. So that probably gives a broad picture of how we live our lives. We live in a very rural place, and we're out and about all the time, irrespective of the weather, and that won't ever change. So I don't think there are many people who can make a career out of sport, but certainly what I do find is that the sporting endeavor has given me a different perspective with regards to team sports and individual sports. In my 30s, I ran marathons and did triathlons.
Wow.
And that was possibly one of the worst things I could have done for my body, because the reality is it broke me as far as my knees and my back. And in my mid to late 40s now, I'm struggling with some of the impacts of going from a sideways movement of football to running in a single direction, doing marathon running. But I started doing that when my daughter was born. She was born prematurely. She was 6 weeks early, and I wanted to give something back. So I ran a marathon for Bliss, the premature baby charity. And
nice.
I got the bug. I just got the bug. And
I think it's like that. I've got one of my best mates is a marathon runner. I think he's done 3 or 4 now. And I say, why do you do it to yourself? But I think once you start, it is that bug, and it just takes
incredible. It's incredible. So, sport has always been a big part of my life in whatever capacity. And that's always underpinned everything that I've done, both professionally and academically. And as I've got older, I've realized the importance of that, not just to myself, my well-being, but for us as a family. We do an awful lot of active things every single day. And I think that
a lot of positivity that comes out of being involved and around sporting activity. So hopefully you're going to keep that up, and some more rock climbing may be on the cards for you and the family in a not too distant future.
I was holding the rope, and I was at the bottom making sure that they weren't slipping. I'm not great with heights, so it wasn't my preference to be there, but actually I think they got an awful lot from it. And as I say, it's about balance. Everything is about balance, whether it's about diet or work or exercise, whatever you're doing, it's just having a good balance of making good choices, and that's what I try and do as much as I possibly can.
Definitely. We'll wrap things up there. I think that you and I have a lot of things that we agree on there. Very similar backgrounds. So look, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you very much. We'll let you get off for the rest of your day.
Thank you, James. And once again, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
Great stuff. Cheers, Adam.